Hello everyone. I hope it's working. Great. So let me introduce you the webinar which you are attending for, which is the new technical features in PrestaShop 1.7.7 with Pablo Borovitz. Just before, I would like to thank our sponsors, which today are PayPal, Criteo, and One Can Media for sponsoring that webinar. In a few instants, you will hear Pablo Borovitz, which is a core development manager in PrestaShop, talking to you about the new technical features in PrestaShop 1.7.7. So thank you, Pablo, for doing this webinar, and I'll let you the mic.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. If you are in Europe, good morning if you are on the other side of the world. I'm really glad to join you today for the first event of the season with PrestaShop. And today we're going to speak, mostly I am going to speak about the new tech features in PrestaShop 1.7.7, the upcoming new minor version of PrestaShop. So before we start, let me introduce myself if you don't know me already. My name is Pablo Borovitz. I'm core development manager at PrestaShop, and I'm in charge of the development of the open source project named PrestaShop. So today we're going to talk about a number of topics. So we'll start with PHP compatibility. Then we'll talk about upgraded libraries, the libraries that we upgraded in this new version, tab management, CQRS debugger, controller overrides, secret breaker, and finally, bonus features for this version. So let's get started. So the first item is PHP compatibility. So as we announced last year, we said that we were going to end support for end-of-life PHP versions, most notably the 5.x branch of PHP, and that we were going to be revising this PHP compatibility with every minor PrestaShop release to be able to be compatible with the latest release version of PHP. So following this announcement, in 1.7.7, this is the first version that we are going to take this new policy into account. So for PrestaShop 1.7.7, the minimum compatibility for PHP has gone up from 5.6, which is no longer supported, to 7.1.3. So this is a major version of PHP, and it's I think it's still receiving security patches, if I'm not mistaken. But the idea was to be as large as possible. So following this announcement, we said that we were going to support the oldest PHP version as we could, as long as the libraries that we use in PrestaShop also supported it. So it was impossible for us to support newer version of PHP while keeping this compatibility with very old versions like 5.6. So we upped the minimum to 7.1. And the maximum version that we support of PHP is 7.3, which is not the latest, as you are probably aware. But the problem was that when we froze this new version of PrestaShop, 7.4 wasn't released already, and so the libraries that we depended on weren't ready as well. So the maximum version of PHP that we support in this version is 7.3, and 7.4, as I said before, is not yet compatible, but it will be in 1.7.8, the next version of PrestaShop. So the good news is, since the minimum compatibility now is 7.1, you can use in your modules and in the core of PrestaShop, we can use the new features, the new language features of PHP 7.0 and 7.1, like strict typing, to increase code stability. The new operators like new coalescing and spaceship operators, anonymous classes, class constant visibility, and so on and so forth. So this is an example of the code of PrestaShop core. I just took a random function that was updated recently so that you can see that you can have signed parameters with scalar types like string, the nullable types, like in this case it's string or null, the return types, the new coalesce operator like this one, which is quite nice, and the most important, strict types. So this is something that people often forget, but strict typing in PHP is optional. So you have to, it's optional for every file. So you have to remember to declare strict types in all files, because if you don't, then strict type is not enforced. So we are progressively adding this throughout PrestaShop to ensure the most strictness as possible, so that we are able to catch bugs as early as possible and be forced to issue the least amount of patch releases in the future. So the stricter we get, the more quality we will get in the code of PrestaShop. The next item is upgraded libraries. So as I said before, we are dependent on a large number of libraries that we use in PrestaShop, and the compatibility that we can offer at PrestaShop is heavily dependent on the same compatibility, but in our libraries. So in order to support newer version of PHP, we were forced to upgrade a significant amount of libraries. So the most important ones that I'd like to talk about today is PHP Unit, which I hope most of you use already or are familiar with, which was upgraded from 5.7 to 7.5, which is two major versions in between. SwiftMailer, which was upgraded as well, and PHP Parser, which was also upgraded to a new major version. And there are many other libraries that we had to upgrade, but which are mostly minor upgrades, so you can expect to have a lower amount of breaking changes in your code if you're relying on them, either on your current shop if you did some modifications yourself, or in modules if they are using these libraries. And while we struggled we were trying not to upgrade libraries to major versions to minimize the impact on modules that we are relying on the interfaces of those libraries, but we were forced to make a choice, and it was more important for us to support newer PHP versions, which otherwise would leave merchants open to security bugs in PHP, than to ensure full backwards compatibility. So we were forced to make this choice, and we choose to upgrade these libraries. And while we were at it, we also updated jQuery on all pages to the latest version that was available when we froze this new version of PrestaShop. So we managed to upgrade jQuery to 3.4 without introducing breaking changes, thanks to a library which is called jQuery Migrate, which allows to upgrade the jQuery version while keeping most of the APAs that change between versions. So if we have a look at the different parts of PrestaShop that were upgraded, for example, core and classic theme, we're using jQuery 2 in the core part, because you have the theme code which was already in jQuery 3, but you have the core theme, the thing that we call the core theme, which is a bunch of core functionality which is shared among all themes, regardless of the one that you're using. So this was upgraded from jQuery 2 to jQuery 3.4. The legacy pages in the back office were using jQuery 1, and they were upgraded to jQuery 3.4 as well. And finally, the Symfony pages, which were already on jQuery 3.4. So across the whole software, all parts are using the same jQuery version. So if you were waiting for this to benefit from the features of jQuery 3, you can use it now. Next up is tab management. So some of you may be asking yourself, what is a tab? What are you meaning when you say tab? So tab is the internal name for the menu elements, basically. So these menu elements are stored in database. And when you are working with modules, you often want to create new pages and then have access to these controllers on the back office menu. So when you do that, you have to create a new tab, a new menu element. So before, when you were trying to add a new tab, you have a lot of code to write. So there is the install tab function, which basically is used to create a new tab manually and insert it using object model. And then there were a lot of manual wiring that you had to do for when you uninstalled your module, you had to manually clean up your tab. When you install it, your module, you have to create it. When the module was enabled or disabled, you have to disable or uninstall your tab as well. And while for legacy modules, this was the creation could be automated a little bit. For the creation, the suppression, the activation and deactivation of tabs, this was a manual job. So what we did in 1.7.7 was, first, we got rid of all this manual work that you had to do. And secondly, we streamlined the process of creating these tabs. So now it's much easier. You have this tabs property on your module that you only have to add the properties on this tab attribute of your module, and the tabs will be created and deleted automatically and enabled and disabled automatically when your module is enabled and disabled automatically. So these are two things. The first one is automatic tab registration, which was already available for legacy controllers, and is now available as well for Symfony controllers. It's much more easier now, and an all new feature, which is automatic enable and disable when you use this technique. And if you look at the code, you will find something that may have caught your eye if you're used to the old way of configuring tabs. Is this property, which is called root name. And I would like to talk a little bit about that. So when you create Symfony controllers in modules, of course, you have to create a route so that when you have this URL for the user to access, you have to wire this URL to your controller. So this in Symfony is done through configuration, the routes.yml configuration file. And there's a bunch of elements that you have to set. So the first one is obviously the name of your route, which in this case, for let's say we're working with a module that is called my module. So we prefix the route using the module name, which is optional. You don't have to do it, but I think it's a good practice. So you name your route, then you state the path, which will control to which URL your controller will be attached. So when you go to your shop.com/admin/mymodules/demo, you will get to this controller. So when you use the get method, and then you have these properties that you have to set up. The first one is the controller, where you set up the name of your controller and the name of the method you want to invoke when the user accesses this route. And then there's these two other properties. The first one is called legacy controller. This is something that is part of the strategy to migrate core controllers, which is basically used as a legacy hook, because in the past, controllers were called something admin controller, or something front controller, or something module controller, and so on. And there are a lot of systems that which are reliant on controllers being called like this. So what we did is, for example, for access control and for tab management, we were forced to use the old controller names. For example, when we migrated, let's say, the preferences page, the controller was called preferences controller, and the new one is called differently. So we use this variable to link the two together. So everything that was tied to the old controller keeps working. And since these systems are still managed by legacy code, when you create a new controller that doesn't have a legacy equivalent, you still have to create a new name, which is fake, but it's still a name, which is called legacy controller, so that you can handle links and tabs and access control. And as I said, so the first one is legacy controller, which handles access control and tabs. And the second one is legacy link, which is used when you are using internal links through the link class, which is the same thing. It just matches a controller with a Symfony controller. So the new thing in 177 is that when you are creating a new controller that didn't have legacy equivalent, and you don't care about legacy links, this property legacy link is now optional. You don't have to take care about it. You just use legacy controller, and the code will automatically match this using the route, as I was saying before, in tabs. So next up is CQRS debugger. So let's have a little recap about what CQRS means. For those of you who don't know, this stands for Command Query Responsibility Segregation, which is an acronym of a common practice that is gaining more and more reputation amongst developers, and in particular PHP developers, which are just starting to use it. So the main idea is to separate the write and read models when you're working on the database or with a complex system. So this is something that we are starting to implement in PrestaShop. We started a couple of years ago, and you're probably going to see it more and more. This is something that we are using in the core only. So if you're developing modules and you don't interact with the core, you don't need to use them for your own actions. This is something that is mostly useful when you're trying to understand how the core works, or if you're trying to use core functionality, or if you're trying to modify core functionality. So the idea is that when you are writing, if you want to perform a mutation in the state of the system, you go through a command which is basically a class, which represents an action that we want to perform. For example, if we want to create an order for placing an order to the system, so we'll create an instance of a create order command. We'll pass along all the needed parameters, like, for example, which client it is, which cart we are using, and so on and so forth. And then we don't have to care about how this action is performed. We just create an instance of this class, then we invoke the handle method of a special service which is called the command and query bus, and it will take care of having it done. And this is done through other services which are called command handlers, which take care of this business. So a command is sent through a command bus, and command handlers take it and do the job to modify whatever it needs to be done in the core. And the other way around, if, for example, I want to find out all the orders placed by a user, I just create I instantiate a new instance of get orders from user, and I pass along the user ID, and then I send it to the command and query bus, which will take care of creating of finding out the data that I want. There are some classes called query handlers which will take care of that, and they will take care of interacting with the core and finding out all the information that I need. I just have to know that there's a query that is called get orders from user, and when I want to create a mutation, that there is one command which is called create order command. While it looks complicated, it makes things much simpler, and in the future you will be seeing this more and more in PrestaShop, and it will make things much easier for you. If you ever want to do something on the card, you will stop having to struggle and find out which service you have to instantiate and which methods you have to call and in which order. You just create an instance of the thing that you want to do, and you just send it, and it gets done. You don't have to take care of anything else. So this is something that we are implementing more and more in the core. And there's a new feature in 177, which is the CQRS debugger. It's a new tab that we added in the Symfony debugger that you see on the lower side of your screen whenever you're in a Symfony-based controller. So we added a new tab which is called command queries, and so in this new feature allows you to see for the page where you are which commands and which queries were called in that page. So, for example, this is the order page, and if we want to know, well, which query handles the data that I am seeing in this page, so I just open this tab and I go to the Symfony profiler, and I can see which were the queries that were called. We can see get order for viewing. The query handler, the service that handles this query is called get order for viewing handler, and it was called from order controller on line 383. And this makes debugging and discovery much easier for developers which are discovering how this feature is working. So I hope this feature will be useful for you whenever you're trying to understand how a page works, and that you will find it useful. Next up is controller overrides, or should I say rerouting and decoration. So controller overrides answers to the question, a question that we are having more and more, which is how do I change the behavior of an existing page? So there are many ways to change how a core page works. The first one, the most known one probably, is using hooks. Hooks are deeply rooted usually in PrestaShop code, and they provide a limited leeway, a limited liberty in whatever you want to do. So sometimes they will be useful for the specific thing that we are trying to achieve, and sometimes they will be just too far of the piece of code that you are interested in, and they aren't useful for your use case. So many people resort to just changing the original code in the controller so they can have an additional variable injected into Twig or whatever. So this is a very, 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 very common use case. So to answer this, there are three different ways of changing the behavior of an existing page without resorting to hooks. The first one is rerouting. The second one is controller override, which you probably know or have a clue of what it means. And the third one is controller decoration. I will go through the three of those. The first one is rerouting. So if you look at the chart on the right, conceptually, rerouting means that when a user accesses a specific route, for example, let's see the orders page, the orders listing page. This goes to the Symfony router, which will it will associate a route, a specific endpoint with a specific controller and action. So when you reroute, instead of going to the original controller and the original action within the controller, you are just rerouting this endpoint and going through your module controller. And this works with configuration, basically. So again, by modifying the routes YML file in your module, you can redefine an existing route, so use the same name and the same path. And instead of going to the PrestaShop controller, you go to your modules controller and you set up that you want to go to demo controller, demo action. And you use this little new property as well, which is called disable module prefix, because by default, all routes configured by modules are prefixed with the module name. So using this new property, you can disable that and start your route at the root. And these two properties, you just leave it like they were in the original page, so that you can use the same access control and the same internal links if you want internal links to go to your controller instead of the original one. So to recap, this way works with rerouting a request. So the advantages is that it's quite easy to configure. So you only have to change, you have to add a little configuration on your module and you're set. Other control actions are untouched. You're just changing the route and rerouting it to your own controller. So other endpoints which are handled by the original controller are left untouched. The drawbacks is that you have to re-implement the whole action you are rerouting, because since the original controller is no longer referenced, now you're in control of that route, but you have to re-implement it yourself. So the second option is override, which you are probably heard of. You know this for how it works for legacy controllers. In the case of Symfony controllers, this works at the container level. So for any endpoint which is handled by a specific controller, when you redefine it in the Symfony container, instead of instantiating the original controller, it will instantiate your own. So how does this work? It works at the service level. So again, on your module, you set up a config and you say that the class of the original controller is now this. So you're replacing order controller with demo controller. There's a little typo here. You don't have you don't need demo action. So this has some advantages and disadvantages. So the advantage is that really easy to configure. It's 2 lines and you're done most of the time, because it depends on how the controller is instantiated. The drawbacks of using this is that you will have to re-implement all actions which were being handled by the original controller, not just the one that you wanted to redefine. You can't access the original controller because since you replaced it at the container level, it's never instantiated, so you don't have access to it. You need to rewire all the dependencies of the original controller if you extend the original controller. So if you choose to override by saying my controller extends the original controller, if the controller had a bunch of dependencies that had to be injected at creation, you'll have to rewire them on your own via configuration. And the worst part of this is that it doesn't age very well, meaning that whenever anything is changed on a future version on the original controller, it won't be reflected on your own controller unless you change the code yourself as well. And the final option is decoration. Decoration is the actual recommended way of overriding things in Symfony. It works with a pattern that is called the wrapper pattern. So this also works at the container level, as you see here. And the idea is that you kind of replace the original controller, but you still get to instantiate the original controller at the start. So basically what you do is you inject the original controller inside your module controller by the means of configuration. So you set up your controller, which is called my module controller demo controller. You specify that it decorates, it replaces other controller, and this other controller is instantiated and injected into the constructor of your module controller, so you have access to it. So this has some advantages. The first one is because of decoration, you can have the same interface, you can implement the same interface as the original controller, and you can just delegate the actions to the original controller. You just implement, for example, if you have a method which is called foo, you have this public function foo, and then you call parent foo, or it's not parent, it's this decorated, which is the instance that you have, the instance of the original controller that you have inside of it, and then you call the original foo method, and that's it. And this allows you to intercept and manipulate the input and the output of the original controller, because since you redefine the original method, you could take the request, add new parameters, for example, and then call the original function. Or if you would like to change the output, you could instead of you could call the original method of the original constructor, then take the output of this controller and then modify it as you please, and then send it back to the user. So it requires little amount of code finally, and it provides a lot of flexibility. And you can also have decoration chaining, which is not available in the other ones. For example, if you have two modules which override the same controller, the last one wins. When you use decoration and you change decorations, then you can delegate in chain. So for example, you have the original controller, which is called A, one module that decorates it using controller name B, and another module that decorates the original one, and it's called C. Because of the Symfony servers container, when controller C references controller A, it will actually get controller B. And this will allow you to do a lot of creative stuff and also have less module collision if two modules are trying to change the behavior of the same thing. This, of course, has some drawbacks, which is, for example, it's not suitable for all use cases. Some use cases are more easily performed using one of the other techniques. It also forces you to re-implement the controller's interface, so all the public methods have to be re-implemented again, even if you can delegate them to the original implementation. And worst, for 177, this is still in an experimental phase. And for example, annotations for example, for access rights don't work very well. The magic call method doesn't work well with controllers as well. So there are still a lot of things to do so that we can actually recommend using it in production, but you can experiment and see if it works for you. And if not, you have the other two possibilities that I talked about before. Next up is circuit breaker that you have probably heard about before, because it's something that we've been working with for a while now. So how does this work? In normal times, whenever a PrestaShop instance requires accessing some external service via HTTP, usually what happens is that there's a request done from the backend, let's say to some other site.com, and then there's a binary response or text response or whatever, but there's a response and a timely response and everything works well. So this is, of course, ideal, and ideal doesn't exist. So what happens? So in some cases, what happens is that the external service is saturated or it's down for some reason, so it's on fire and it doesn't work anymore. And what happens is that PrestaShop gets a nice loading screen, which is loading forever. And if it takes enough time, then the PrestaShop instance dies out of timeout. And this is something that has unfortunately happened in the past, and we would like to do something so that it stops happening and that the software is resilient regarding external services. So what we did is we implemented a pattern which is called circuit breaker, which is something that most other languages are used to, and it works similarly to this electrical box that you have probably seen on your own homes before. And the principle is that when a circuit it's overheated and it doesn't work, then it snaps up and it protects you from getting on fire. And the same principle applies for for this thing that we implemented in PrestaShop. So to get to the same example that I spoke about before, so there's a request to an external service which is down, and this new library, which we call circuit breaker, will be observing requests made, the status of the server, which is supposed to provide an answer, and the history of how well the previous request performed. So if the response takes long enough, then it will snap up and it will immediately return a degraded response to PrestaShop so that it doesn't time out. And the good thing about this is that it will not wait for a timeout the next time. So once the circuit breaker is up, it will block new requests to that external services, and it will return the degraded response for a certain amount of time. For example, I don't know, it's configurable, so it could be, for example, 30 seconds, 30 minutes, 30 days or whatever it's configured to do. So in the end, whenever an external service is down, you will still have a quick access to your PrestaShop. This is a standalone library that we released last year, and it's now bundled in PrestaShop 177. It provides resiliency against third-party services downtime. So if a third-party service is down, your site will not be down as well. And requests performed in the core are being progressively protected by this tool. And yeah, there were many requests that we protected in this version, and more to come in the future. And we encourage you to use it if you rely on third-party services. And finally, a couple bonus features on this version. The first one being that we changed the code set on all database tables to UTF-8 and before, so that you can use emojis everywhere. Next up, there's now it's possible to use Doctrine entities in front office. So if you're developing modern modules, you want to access Doctrine on your front office controllers, now you can. And the final one is extendable forms. So what is this? So since 176, all forms, Symfony forms I'm speaking about, are extendable. So new items, new form fields can be added to the form builder using hooks, which are documented. Items are automatically added at the end of the form. So if your module wants to add a new form item in whatever form, as long as it's handled with Symfony, you can use it. You can add it through hooks, and it will be drawn automatically. You don't have to take care of that. But if you want to add that field at a specific place within the form instead of at the end of it, it's a little bit more complicated, because you're forced to override the form template and to be able to choose where in the form you want to add it. And starting on 177, we improved this form extensibility. So the good news is that fields can now be added anywhere in the form, just by changing the order of the elements within the form builder. You get the form builder in a hook, so you can change it in a hook. It's much easier to configure the style of the form theme. The form theme was based on Bootstrap 3 originally, and it had several layers of HTML on top of it. We decided to rewrite it from scratch based on the newest Bootstrap form theme from Symfony. So this allows us to use form widget form, which is a single function in Twig, to draw the entire form. This makes modifying an existing form and creating your own, if you're creating a modern controller based on Symfony, it's extremely easy. You just call form widget and you're done on the Twig side. There's a downside of this, is that it is experimental at this time. So not all form fields, not all form types are available yet. There are some type of fields which haven't been adapted, so they may be available, but they don't look as good as the other ones. In any case, this is opt-in, so you can still use the previous way of rendering each form field individually. And the other thing is that it's only implemented in the performance page as of 177, but our objective is to have all forms, all Symfony-based pages in 178 migrated to this new style, which will allow you starting on the next minor version to change the layout of the form without having to override the form layout. And that is all for me. Thank you very much for joining me today. I think we have some questions. Let's see.
Yeah, maybe we can take a few minutes to ask some questions. If some of you want to ask a few questions to Pablo in the public chat, do not hesitate. Pablo will take some time to answer them. So far, we only have a question about the launch of this new version, Pablo.
Yes. So 177 is due to be launched very, very soon. Right now, we are on the last phase of stabilization, which has taken longer than usual. Usually, it's only a month of beta, but we want to really make this version something that people will enjoy using. So the migration of the order page was very, very complex, and we have been detecting quite a lot of regressions in features that are not the most common ones. So in edge cases. So we are fixing it before launch, so that everybody will be happy. So this the release candidate should be out sometime next month, and then we will leave a couple of weeks so that people can test it and report the final bugs if they are. If they're not, then we will be able to launch the final version during the summer. Yeah, so there's a question about the release process. There's an article that we released recently on our build blog, and I very much invite you to read it if you're interested in. It's also in the dev docs as well. So the principle basically is that when we work on a minor version, there is the development time, which takes usually takes the longest portion of the time. So there's a scope that we want to achieve. We say to ourselves, okay, there's these features that we want to include in this version. So until those features are done, we can keep doing things. And once those features are done, we stop adding new contributions and we enter the freeze phase. The code freeze phase is based on stabilizing the branch, so detecting all new bugs and fixing them. And once we are happy with the state of the branch, we release a public beta. The public beta lasts usually for 1 month, and during this stage, we invite everyone in the community to test it and send us their feedbacks. In particular, people who develop modules or who have live shops, and they're willing to upgrade it in a test environment to verify that everything is working as expected, and tell us if it doesn't. Once we close the beta, we finish fixing all the reported regressions. We release a release candidate, which for us could be the final one. If it's for us, it's done. So we release it, and the release candidate is only to give people a second chance to test it again and tell us if for example, if the thing that they reported was broken before is now fixed. And if everything is okay, then we can release. If there's something to fix, then we release a new release candidate, and we do it again and again until everything is good. So for us, it's more important to release stable software rather than saying, okay, we did it on the date that we settled on at first. It's true that this release is quite late. There were a lot of surprises along the way when we were migrating the order page. But the good thing is that we fixed a lot of bugs that we're hidden behind legacy code. So I hope that everybody will be happy, not only about the new features, but also about the new bug fixes. I see a question about translation. Importing, exporting, yes. So in 177, one of the reasons the RC is taking so long is that we identified a problem regarding the translation interface in the back office, and we started a limited refactoring of the backend part of the back office interface, so that modules will be able to export translations correctly again, and also to clarify how translations work with modules. So in 177, it should be fully working. In 178, there will be new features for module translation, and I will be speaking about those next Wednesday on my other presentation. What about front end? People want to know which is the next candidate framework. Yes, I will be speaking about that on Wednesday, so join me for that and you will have all your answers. And regarding the new wishlist module, it should be out soon. I think it's possible that it will be out at the same time of as 177. Since it's not being integrated natively, it's going to be pushed to users. If you choose to use it, it will be available for them. We hope that it will be done in time for 177. Okay.
Well, thank you, Pablo, for your session. Thank you to everyone for asking some questions to Pablo. I think it's time to conclude that webinar session. Let me introduce you the next keynote. Next session will be the keynote of our CEO, Alexandre Remy, at 4 p.m. You have to just go back on the website and attend the session at 4 p.m. It will be in English. And the next worldwide tech session will be with one of our core developer, which is Mathieu Fermand at PrestaShop. It will be about PrestaShop and its security. It will be tomorrow at 3 p.m. So let's see you there. Thank you everyone for watching us. And thank you, Pablo, again for that session.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.